Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog with Riot Mort, and it is Wednesday, about 6:15 a.m., and it is KO Coliseum launch day. 15 TFT sets. Pretty wild. Pretty wild. Seems like just yesterday it was set 10, and yeah, pretty wild. How many more sets we got in us? That's a great question. So, pretty crazy. Anyway, hopefully you guys are enjoying the set now that's out. I certainly didn't wake up at 3:30 a.m. and start looking at data. Nope, out of habit. Nope. I certainly did nothing of the type. But I was able to get back to sleep and at least get a little more sleep. So, well, after this I can go do my hyper roll. Oh man. Well, now what do I do? Because I saved my rank games for the weekend for the stream. So, guess I'll just be chilling doing work. That's okay. I got a couple documents to almost finish up, and then some meetings, 2 interviews again today, back to back. Back to back interviews is rough. It's like, yeah, whatever. But back to back interviews, some stuff going on. In other news, you guys are gonna laugh at this. My health weight gain stuff is going well to the point where the shorts that I wear on my walk every day are starting to fall off. So I might have to find some new shorts. So if you see me occasionally reaching back here, because my shorts are falling, which is a good sign. So that's good stuff. Anyway, yeah, I mean, the set's live. Obviously, you don't want to jump to conclusions, see how things go out. But there's a lot of content in this set, so make sure you give it all a try, explore all the angles, stuff like that. I know there are definitely the people that will, without fail, immediately log on, go to one of the websites, look at the number 1 comp, and go, that's it, And do I wish it's funny looking at every single video game right now, kind of go through this. It's like you can just fast forward and find the answers. The lack of exploration and discovery is making it really hard to truly explore video games and things like that. Hilariously enough, when Gavin and the Wizards people were over, one of the things they talked about is how, up until very recently, Magic cards didn't necessarily have data, right? You couldn't just find out which Magic cards were performing better or not. But ever since Magic the Gathering Arena, all of a sudden they have data on Magic cards, which has been very revealing and very interesting. And so that's been something new to them that they've started having that, a lot of other games don't necessarily. And so the challenge of a digital age, I also wonder, and again, this is just me hypothesizing, but, games like Riftbound, it's is that where some of the danger from it being digital can come from? Because you lose that sort of organic discovery that's a lot of fun. So, interesting thing to think about. But TFT, the way it works against TFT in the sense that, like I said, you can log on, go to a site, and go, that's the number 1 comp. Shocking. But the thing that people haven't quite put together yet is that, as I've said before, data only tells what is, not what can be. And so if anything gets discovered, which does happen, we've seen that many, many times, that can rise to the top as people learn to optimize different items and, positioning and comps and things like that. The trick, though, is that, there's little incentive to be the one trying to be out there optimizing. If your goal is straight LP gains as fast as possible, well, then, yeah, you just look up the answers and do that. So, and there's an interesting design challenge in there somewhere of obviously we'd never ship something like this, so I'm just talking at my ass here, but a system where you gained points based on how infrequently the comp is played and how well you did with it, right? So, but there's a whole lot of problems with that. And again, I would never ship something like that. But in theory, if you could reward a player for that discovery, that would be a pretty cool thing and incentivize players to do that. So that's a challenge. It's a fun thing to think about. So anyway, enough random jibber jabber. Time for questions. All right, the first one, actually, speaking of which, we were just talking about this. Are there different design philosophies between Magic and TFT? And this question was, in reference to the fact I had the Wizards people over, we were playing Magic. Were there any discussions we could talk about? And generally, there weren't a lot of discussions because you try not to, talk about work too much on your time off. And also, company secrets on both sides kind of thing. For example, I was asking them if they can tell, like, which colors were more popular. And they could, but they couldn't reveal it, which makes sense, But as far as design philosophies go, I think generally we have a lot of similar design philosophies, right? Which is like make the game accessible, make the game deep, things like that. I think some of the big differences, though, is like, we were talking how they were a little envious about how, like, we can constantly balance patch and the amount of levers we have, right? Whereas most CCGs, it's like if you have a card that's a 4 mana 3/3 that's causing problems, well, you can make it 5 mana, but that is a massive, massive swing, right? We've seen TFT swing off of, a 2% buff can all of a sudden make a comp viable, and they can only move in increments of like 20 to 40%, So that lack of flexibility around their buffs and nerfs really limits what they can do. And not to mention the printing cycle, right? Like they have to have their cards done pretty early. So we have a lot more flexibility, which is pretty fun, but that can also lead to tinkering and things like that. The other big design philosophy difference is like, they have a card archetype where it's like, what is a red common? What is a red common supposed to do? Commons are supposed to be easy to understand, do staples of the color, things like that. I think one of them was even joking about how hard it is nowadays to make a new red common because they've done so many of the things over the years that making a new red common is very difficult. But rares for them are actually much more the like, yeah, you can break the rules and do whatever, and like you can do some pretty fun stuff. And so, if anything, making rares can be more challenging or like less challenging. And in a way, that's actually very similar to us with like 1 cost versus 5 costs, right? Like, how many different 1 cost tanks can you make? Not that many. Versus 5 costs, it's like, whatever, we can do whatever we want. How about a champion that scales with every stat? Woohoo! So definitely some similarities there. But I think one of the big differences with a CCG compared to TFT is like, let's say they ship a bad card. Just a card that's just absolutely weak and terrible. Okay, it's fine. Nobody plays it. Your problem solved. Let's say we ship a terrible champion that's so bad that no one should ever play it. All of a sudden, you've crippled entire starts. You've crippled a class and an origin because they have to put that in their trait. And so there is a much higher bar on TFT to get every single piece of content right. Now, a little less true for augments, right? A bad augment, not necessarily an issue. A bad, card, totally fine. But both the CCG and TFT have the problem on the too good side. If there's an augment that's a 3.0, that's going to break the game, and anytime someone sees it, they win. If there is a card in Magic that is so unbelievably busted, they have to ban it, That's really their only option, is they have to ban it. Something Corey Steelcutter or something, So I think it's less, difference in design philosophies and more just difference of approaches. But that's just the nature of the types of games we're making. So I think one of the more interesting things was, and maybe this is revealing too much, but I was complaining when we were playing about the land problem. So far in my time back in Magic, the thing I have enjoyed the least is it feels like somewhere between 33 to 50% of games, one of the players either has too much or too few lands, and that decides the game. And so when as many as 33 to 50% of your games aren't really that fun because they're kind of just one-sided based off land draws, it does make the game a lot less fun to me. Now, when the games are good and both players have gotten like the right amount of lands and are casting the spells in the decks they put together, I love the game. The game's a lot of fun. But man, having to essentially have, it reminds me of League, right? Where it's just like upwards of half of your games aren't really good games. Ugh. And so they were talking about how over the years they've added things to reduce that variance to some extent. You know, this is things like pain land, or the lands that like draw other lands from your deck or cycle through or whatever. You know, even stuff in Final Fantasy like the forest cycling or whatever, to help sort of make decks more consistent. So that's definitely something that they work on. So I pitched an idea. I was just sort of like, hey, I'm sure you guys have thought of this, but what if you had like, you know, a land that you could play comes into play tapped, so that's the negative. But when you play it, you draw another basic land from your deck to sort of thin out the lands. And obviously drawing a card is very powerful, but it would reduce the variance quite a bit. And this was the part I thought that was the most interesting. Hi, dear. Oh, that's a buck. The part I thought was the most interesting was they were like, well, the challenge with that is, yes, it's powerful. And if it's too powerful, it's too consistent, right? If a deck can be made that plays the exact same way every game, right? Because it's just like all of its draw engines work, it's perfect, you know, then every game starts to feel the same. And that's really boring for Magic. Like, what you don't want to do is just sit down and be like, yep, your deck is working to the exact mana curve and things that you've decided to do. And it flows perfectly every time because everything is consistent. See you next game, you know. And in that regard, that's pretty similar to TFT, right? We don't want every single game to feel the same because why would you keep playing if it's just every game plays out the same? And I think that's one of the secrets to a long life of a PvP game is that you need variance in your games. So to hear them also think about that was cool to see. I think of some of the least deep PvP games in recent years, I won't call them out by name, but have this problem where a lot of their games just play out exactly the same every single time. And that's a miss. So that was probably one of the more interesting conversations, but there you go. Magic and TFT. Yeah. I don't know. I like the game. I need to find more I told them I was a little jealous of them because the idea of just sitting there every day and like, I want to make this deck. Try out this deck. See if it works. Have fun with the deck. Make a new deck. Repeat. I'm like, man, just doing that all day? That sounds like a very fun cycle. I could see myself enjoying just making decks. So I need to find more opportunities to play Magic. That's what I want. But anyway, all right. Next question. How do you judge whether a mechanic is bad or just executed poorly? And this is an interesting question because I'm sure there are, let's take shadow items as an example, right? Is shadow items a truly bad mechanic that's doomed, or did we just not find the right version of it? A lot of this comes down to judgment and ability to consider other alternative options, right? So in the case of shadow items, well, the core foundation here is the trade-off of power for a negative output that you must play around, right? And so can I think of lots of different ways to give you power for a negative trade-off on items? Yeah, of course. Probably think of 100 different ways right now, no problem. Right? But the thing that players didn't like about it was that if you don't think about that trade-off right, you are essentially just ruining yourself. And in the item system, people just want to have a positive interaction of make thing more powerful by putting item on it. They don't want to get trapped and baited into things that don't work. And so, under that assumption, is there any version of give you power at the trade-off of a negative that doesn't fall under the assumption of players don't want to be baited by a negative? Not really. Certainly not in the item system. So, under that guise, we can assume that shadow items are a bad mechanic, right? It's not come up with different shadow items. The core problem is the core problem. Now, that's not to say every mechanic is like that, right? So, I don't know if you guys remember, but on one of these walks, I told you about how we had a mechanic, took it to player labs. I felt the version was implemented incorrectly, and it responded very, very poorly in the player labs, so we had to change it. Well, that particular mechanic, again, the problem was it was too influential. And are there versions of it that aren't that problem? Well, yeah. If you tone the power down so it's not so influential, guess what? It won't be so influential. Therefore, this is one that I would call badly executed, right? Because there are alternatives out there that get around the problem you're running into. And so the high level answer here is, if you have a mechanic that is poorly received, what is the problem? Is there a solution that avoids this problem? If there is, then it was badly executed. If there isn't, then it's just a bad mechanic. And so that's kind of the answer at the highest level. Now, the broad thing here is, again, it requires you to have an understanding of the potential other solutions. And if you don't have that, you might just go, well, it's just a bad mechanic, when actually it's badly executed. And so that does require a bit of creativity of thinking of those other solutions. But again, sort of at the high level, that's kind of the analysis I would do. And so, again, looking through some of them, I'm trying to think of, we haven't had that many bad mechanics. Legends. Okay, let's take Legends, for example. Not that Legends are inherently bad, but clearly they have a problem, which the problem is they reduce the variance in TFT, and we just talked about this in the Magic thing, right? It's like where games all start to feel the same is not a good thing. So, the question is there a version of Legends that doesn't reduce the variance in TFT? And the answer might be yes. There definitely are some versions out there, but hilariously enough, the tension is the people who like Legends like it because it does exactly that. It reduces the variance, right? Like, I get to play Pandora's items every game, or I get to play whatever I like every game. So Legends reduce variance. Reducing variance is the problem, right? And so you could make the assumption that Legends is a bad mechanic simply from that. But if you're like, man, the upsides of Legends are worth exploring, then again, it's up to you to explore, okay, is there a version of Legends that gets around this problem? If there is, that would be quite the discovery, because it could all of a sudden become worth revisiting. But if there isn't, then again, it's not just badly executed, it's just bad, you know? So, like I said, that's kind of how you would analyze the mechanics to find the answer to your question. Now, again, some of this is a little subjective and depends on your definitions of what the problem is and things like that. But overall, that's how you'd approach it. So, and like I said, if I look back at truly bad mechanics in TFT, shadow items, maybe Legends, you could argue. It's kind of about it. right? Like there's definitely a version of any of the other ones that you could argue are, bad, I think are much more subjective to taste. And again, there's probably adjustments you could make to those, right? And again, like I'm just brainstorming here. None of this is like future sight, but let's say you really hated Chosen and you're like, that's a bad mechanic. Well, even if you really hate Chosen, I think you'd have to put it in the badly executed version, because there's probably a version of Chosen that you would like that is less impactful, right? This is well, what if it's not 2-star? Or what if it doesn't give +1 to one of the traits? Or what if the bonuses are more unique or whatever, right? Like based on your subjective taste, there are adjustments you could make to that system that probably fit your subjective tastes. So that's why I wouldn't, even if you don't like Chosen, I wouldn't call it a bad mechanic. I would quantify it as badly executed for your tastes. So yeah, I'm trying to think. Are there any other mechanics I would put in the truly fundamentally flawed? I don't think so. So, yeah. There you go. All right. How will future set revivals work with roles revamped? So, as always, disclaimer, I'm not on the set revivals team. I can't speak for them completely. I do talk to one of their leads every once in a while. But overall, I don't really have much impact here. So do not take this as an official response. That being said, my understanding, based on how we've done set revivals in the past, is that set revivals are still built off all of the core systems. They don't reinvent the systems. This is why we don't have, the old items or old behavior or anything like that. So any updates we do to a core system will persist in a set revival. Meaning, roles revamped will exist in a set revival, right? We'll have the same mana regen stats, all the same mana rules, things like that. Because the way set revivals have become framed, due to this, I wouldn't even call it limitation, I would just call it choice, is that set revivals are less about like a classic mode, less of a revisit, or less of a revisit of exactly that moment in time, and more of a, hey, you want to revisit that theme? Well, we're bringing it back, with some of those modern adjustments. And so it becomes a break where you can play one of the old set wrappers with the current rules. And having that old set wrapper kind of creates novelty. I get to play set 4, but, and again, not an official, I picked an old set. There's not some weird announcement here hidden. Sorry, I have to keep disclaimering this stuff because I really don't want anyone to ever be like, Mort's revealing stuff on his walk. I'm literally pulling stuff out of my ass, okay? But anyway, you're playing set 4, and it's like, the novelty is like, oh, set 4 with roles revamped and augments and some new specific team up augments or whatever. Like, it's a new toy to play with. And that's how set revivals have mostly been framed, is like, again, less pure nostalgia and more fun toy to play with in between sets. So my guess is, like I said, roles revamped will persist. And one of the things that team will have to do, like let's say they were making set 1 next. Again, pulling numbers out of my ass, not a real reveal. Let's say they were doing set 1 next. They would have to, one of the things that team would have to do is go through all the champions and go, what roles are they? Do they have the right allocations? Does it make sense? Like that's a lot of the work that team does, is taking an old set and modernizing it. And then we're also going to make a Void Cassidon augment that says no B patch, and that's the name of the augment. Now I'm just trolling myself here, but you get the idea. So TLDR here is, how will roles revamped work? It'll probably be on the old sets, is my guess. Not an official announcement. I'm sure whatever set revival is coming next, you'll find that out for sure, but that is my guess. So, Okay. And again, I have to throw in a lot of these disclaimers because it's like, you can logically sort of figure this out, and that's why I'm willing to answer this, but it isn't my area. And so if let's say I'm wrong and it comes out and they didn't do roles revamped, okay, it's fine. Doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking about. Just means, like I said, that's an area of our now large team and large game that I'm not constantly monitoring because that team's got it. They don't need my help, So, all right, last one. And I liked this question the best today. How do you still do impactful tank designs? Tank designs are relatively limited. How do you keep them memorable? And did roles revamped open up some new design space? I love this question. This is a fundamental question that Giovanni and I have debated a couple times. Because you can definitely see attempts throughout the years where we've tried to make more impactful tank designs. But the problem is, a lot of the times when you do that, what happens is they just become less good at their core role, and then people don't end up playing them. Or occasionally we strike gold and we get one of the most memorable tanks of all time. And that's the interesting thing, because at the end of the day, at its most simplest version, is TFT teams are made up of two things: tanks and damage dealers. At its simplest, highest level, that's all TFT is. Damage dealers need to kill the enemy team, and tanks need to delay that killing. That's it. How do they delay that killing? Well, they put a healer shield on themselves, or give themselves some armor and MR, or some DR, whatever, right? Like, they essentially have a defensive output. Those are the most common ones. Now, what can they do besides that? Well, one of the things they can do is slow down the enemy team's DPS through actions like CC or debuffs. But we've generally found those to be the sharpest and most painful to play against. Remember 2-cost Nautilus with a 3-second stun? That was his defensive output. And guess what? Players hated playing against it, right? So over the years, we've had to use stuns a lot more sparingly. But as we've reduced the ability to use stuns, design space on tanks have closed a bit, where it's like, okay, well, if you can't stun, I guess all you can do is shield, heal, armor, MR, and DR. And it's like, you can only do so many tanks that do exactly those 4 things. Again, Giovanni, as sort of the lead of sets, has sort of cursed this and really been like, we've got to find more spaces. Now, again, we've struck gold a couple times where you let them do all that, but add a hook, right? I think probably the most famous example of a tank that really shined and became a memorable favorite was Set 9 Cho'Gath. Because at the end of the day, what does he do? Well, he does a little damage and heal. His spell is just that. But the twist is that if he kills, he gains permanent health and gets bigger, and we use the stacking fantasy. And the stacking fantasy on a tank was great. And people were making giant Cho'Gaths, and that was awesome, right? Like, that's great. But we can only make a stacking tank so many times before everyone's just like, oh yeah, it's just Cho'Gath again. It's just Cho'Gath again, That uniqueness is so sharp, you can't really reuse it too often. So, again, trying to find more unique patterns. I think Cassante is an example of this in KO Coliseum, where it's like, well, what if we have a tank that when they die turns into a damage dealer? But this is what I was saying about how if they don't do their core thing well, they become weaker. Because Cassante has so much of his budget in the ability to second res and become a damage dealer, as a primary tank, he's pretty bad. Like, kind of terrible. Now, someone is going to go like, wait, Cassante is really powerful right now. Well, yeah, he's very powerful because he's a second health bar with an aggro drop that's essentially a force of nature. That's really, really powerful on its own. But, you're not putting Warmog's Gargoyle on this guy. It's not where you want to put the items. You're going to get more value putting them somewhere else. It's the whole red mage problem I've described before. So, I don't know that I would quantify Cassante as like a huge success of new design space and tanks, but he's unique, which is cool. And this is definitely one of the things we struggle with a bit is like, again, if a tank truly is going to do their job well, they're probably going to do it sharply through survivability. But that sharpness through survivability is boring as hell. So, yeah, this is one of the things that we look for the most. Now, is there new design space opened up? Probably. I'm making this up as I go here. But one of the things a tank could do is, again, I'm making this up here, but imagine a tank that says takes 20% less damage from marksman, or hell, again, maybe I'm revealing too much because I'm just thinking out loud here, but like imagine a 4-cost tank that when you put in, you could choose a mode and choose a class or a role to be specifically tankier against. Now, again, there's a bunch of reasons why I wouldn't do that because it's complicated. It becomes very, who am I fighting? Scouting constantly trying to change it. But again, there's at least a design space there of like counterplay or interesting things like that. So is there some new design space? Yeah, I think so. Will we dig into it? Maybe, maybe not. It might be too risky. I'm doing that thing where I'm thinking out loud and already going through all the, here's the reasons it wouldn't work. Here's the reasons it could work. Here's how, that's just how my brain works. Sorry. But yeah, TLDR here is that, yeah, tanks are a challenge. We debate this a lot. Making interesting tanks is hard, but I also tell the team not to stress about it. I don't necessarily need all my tanks to be interesting. They're not the exciting part about the set. But if we find a couple, that's awesome. I'd much rather the team focus on making interesting carries, interesting origins, interesting augments. We get more return for the thought time in those spaces. But we do what we can. And is there some new design space? Yeah, I think so. So there you go. I'm at 32 minutes. I actually could talk about this question for a lot longer, but it's a very good question. So, yeah. All right, there you go. 32 minutes. KO Coliseum's out. Enjoy. I have to fight the urge to think about it too much. I've been doing this 6 years, man. Turning my brain off on this stuff is hard. And it's so weird to be told, don't think about this stuff. I don't like it. I'll be honest with you. I don't like it. I want to get in there, but I need to not. So, and for what it's worth, we are getting exactly what we wanted out of this, which is like the team that's working on it is growing a lot more because of this, which is great. So that's awesome. I'm proud of the team for what they did. So if any of them watch this, like I said, no matter the results, the effort they put in was S+ tier, and I'm really proud of that. So, all right, that's gonna do it for me. I'm gonna go find some breakfast and get to work. That's gonna do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.